Can you all hear me? Whoa. My friend, whoever pays attention to the board meetings, trustees, always tells me I need to talk closer to the mic. And I always forget. So I hope if she's listening that she can hear me. Everybody, thank you so much for taking time from your busy start of the week to come and visit with us. I want this meeting to be very informal. Sorry, the chairs are sort of organized as if we were in a classroom, because we're not. And I'm certainly not the principal. However, I do want to just say thanks again for taking the time to visit and to maybe frame this conversation this evening. Let me just talk a little bit about why we're here and what we're doing, and obviously give you all an opportunity, because we want to make this interactive and have a good conversation. So at the board meeting that we had earlier in the month of August, we talked a little bit about two pieces of legislation. I feel like I'm not seeing everybody's face here, that were important, I believe, to the community and to our economic development growth as a community. The two issues were, one is a ballot initiative that the trustees and I approved to put on the ballot related to raising some revenues for the village to implement an economic development plan for the community. That issue is now on the ballot and certainly up for discussion. However, the second piece of the legislation was an ordinance, directing the staff to implement and develop, if you will, first and foremost, develop a plan, an economic development plan for the village. The economic development plan would be, if you will, a blueprint that would be available, that would express the interests of the village to grow, especially in our 4th Street corridor and our business corridors, but also to express the interests that if funds become available to the village to implement and to invest, that these are the broad areas and categories that we would like to invest those dollars. So what we did, rather than starting from scratch and following the trustees' direction at that meeting, I asked Shanna, who I don't know if all of you have met Shanna, but Shanna is our planning and zoning director and otherwise policy extraordinaire. I asked Shanna to do a couple of things with John's help and support. We looked at some of the regional economic development plans that have been developed in our region to get a sense of what does an economic development plan look like and what are the elements that this plan should have, and put together what I call a straw man, for lack of a better way of saying it, put a plan together that we will present to you tonight so that we can all start the conversation from a point of what's in the plan and give you a perspective of what is required to have a economic development plan that reflects what our priorities are and how we might fund that plan, either vis-a-vis the quarter-cent initiative that's on the ballot and or if we had additional state funds that might be available that we could apply to implement some of these initiatives. So that's the conversation tonight is, again, the trustees in their infinite wisdom said, let's have at least 1 or 2 public hearings and have a conversation about this with the residents and get their perspectives about whether or not we're going down the right path, if we've got the right issues on the table, et cetera. So we're gonna be presenting to you all what you have up there, which is called Harvesting Opportunity, and this is Investing in Ourselves, a local economic plan for the village of Los Ranchos. So keep in mind, we took some of the things from our friends in Corrales and other places, et cetera, and since John and his previous experience in Corrales was very much involved in how Corrales implemented and put together their plan. I think the most important point that I would make about the plan, it's a living document. So what we put in the plan today is always subject to review and if you will, re-examination by the community at large through the trustees in the process. In this plan, I think, Shanna, we proposed that the plan would be evaluated every 2 years. Is that every 2 years? That's a starting point. If we think it needs to be evaluated on a yearly basis, that's certainly up for conversation and certainly up for discussion. The challenge with doing it every year is that things change, but they don't change that fast unless you have a lot of money to be able to implement those things. But nonetheless, I think that's something to think about. But the more important point is simply that the plan can evolve as our priorities change, as perhaps our investments come to fruition in certain areas, and we want to restructure the plan so that it meets new and future needs. So that's an important piece. Before we get too far, however, I think it's sort of important for those that might not have been at the trustee meeting to have one of our experts, in Grant Taylor, come up and talk a little bit about this particular piece of work that we're doing and what we're asking you all to participate in tonight. Grant has a lot of experience with these issues, and as John does. And so obviously giving you all an opportunity to if you will, have some input. Now keep in mind, we're gonna present a lot of things for you, hopefully not too long time, and then we'll really open it up for a conversation so that all of you can ask questions, et cetera. So we don't wanna make this much longer than we need to. So with that, Grant, can you just grab this mic here and go through some of the, or you wanna use that one? That's great.
So good evening, everyone. I'm Grant Taylor. For more than 20 years, I have worked directly in or in support of economic development. I'm here to provide technical assistance. So for a bit of level setting, the definition that I have for economic development is very similar to that of the International Economic Development Council. It's those policies, programs, and activities that improve economic well-being and quality of life, as well as provide a stable tax base. So before moving to the area 9 years ago, and the first place I lived was Los Ranchos. My son attended Los Ranchos Elementary and Taylor Middle School. I worked for an economic development organization for a few years in Lee County, and I ran the Chamber of Commerce in Hobbs for 5 years. One of the perspectives that I bring is really the importance of public-private partnerships. On numerous occasions, my hometown, the city of Artesia, has partnered with a local family foundation as well as businesses on their main street to set a benchmark for downtown revitalization. If you haven't been to Artesia, at least Google it. You know, there's a really beautiful place on their downtown. Lee County government assisted the town of Tatum to recruit a grocery store, so that very small ranching community could have more choices than what was available at the gas station. There are more examples of what can be done with the Local Economic Development Act on the handout that was near the door. Those local governments were able to provide support for those projects because they had passed an ordinance that said they would use and comply with the Local Economic Development Act, or LEDA. LEDA was a statute that was passed by the legislature in the 90s, following what voters had said in a constitutional amendment that it is appropriate to use public resources for economic development. Economic development is one of the few exceptions to our Constitution's anti-donation clause. More than 80 cities and counties in New Mexico have passed LEDA ordinances, and we're hoping that Los Ranchos will be among them here very shortly. At the very least, passing a LEDA ordinance allows a community to act as a fiscal agent or a pass-through for state resources that may be used as an incentive for economic development projects. What it also does is it empowers communities to use their own resources to support economic development efforts that are tailored to their local needs. So really want to applaud the Board of Trustees for taking the important step of publishing the LEDA ordinance and asking for public consideration. I applaud all of you for being here to consider the merits. And, you know, one of those really important things, a part of LEDA, is the development of a plan, and really look forward to hearing this first draft and hearing your feedback to that plan. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Grant. Let me also then frame this piece, because I did forget two things. One, let me introduce our trustees who are here tonight, because they also spend a lot of time helping me and John and all of us implement policy for the city. So we have George Ratnovich is here. He's one of our trustees. Got Jennifer Kiefer is here as well. Thanks, Jennifer, for being here. And of course, Gil Benavides is here. So thank you so much. Look, it's to me, it's always important to make sure that we all spread the credit when we do good things, and that we all sit back and take it when we're not doing the right things. However, nonetheless, I thank you all for being here. So one more piece that I failed to mention is this legislation to, if you will, to pass the ordinance that establishes a process for developing a plan and does what Grant just said, I'm sorry, which is establishing a plan, is on the agenda for the 23rd of this month. It was published when it was introduced, and all that action will do is really direct the staff to move forward with implementing this plan. I want to be really clear about this. We will then have a conversation yet again, if you will, and then present the actual plan to the trustees at a subsequent meeting where they will actually adopt the plan. So there's still some opportunity, not just tonight, but in the next month or so, to continue this conversation. So I want to make sure that as you all get a chance to read this, we're going to upload the plan to the website after our conversations tonight, and with the suggestions you all might make, giving Shanna an opportunity to adjust that, and then putting it out again into the to the community so that we can have more conversations. So on the 23rd, next Tuesday, we will be asking the trustees to approve the ordinance that sets the process in place for us to finish this plan, and then we will then bring it to the Board of Trustees for final approval, and then now have a plan and a mechanism to not only invest in ourselves, but hopefully encourage our legislature to provide us funding to do what we need to get done. So with that being said, I know you all are waiting for this part, so I'm going to turn it over to Shanna, and she is going to go over what I would be calling, again, a straw man, an idea of what a plan looks like, and presenting some of the way we might invest these funds, and then opening it up for conversation and for any input that you all might have as a community.
Thanks, Mayor. Hey, everyone. Good evening. Next slide, please. There are copies of this presentation at the sign-in table, so if you'd like to follow along, please feel free to grab one of those. Tonight, we're going to talk about the main framework of the plan. So we're going to talk about why LEDA, why is that important, how can it help the village, what do we already have going for us in the village that LEDA can help support, what will we do to offer that support if a LEDA ordinance is passed and if the funds are acquired? How will it work? This will be kind of the nuts and bolts of the programming and the application and the process, and then kind of looking ahead at the next steps. Next slide. So why LEDA? In the title slide, the kind of catchphrase that I think we're associating with this is a framework to invest in ourselves, to invest in the village of Los Ranchos. It's a tool that allows communities to have a clear public benefit when it comes to economic development funds that the government might be giving to a private property owner or otherwise. This means putting resources into assets we already have, like the 4th Street corridor, the shops, the restaurants, the services there. It means taking care of our agritourism anchors, like the Agri Nature Center, the Del Norte open space, and making sure that those places can continue to welcome folks and maybe even welcome them in new ways. And it means lifting up nonprofits and cultural groups that might exist in the village that tell our story, such as the Historical Society, the folks who run the arts market, etc. Everything in the draft plan relates back to the 2035 master plan. The village has a long-range planning document that establishes how the village wants to grow, how they don't want to grow, what they want to see, what they don't want to see. It's important that the LEDA plan really rely on that as a backbone because that's already been adopted by the Board of Trustees. It's already gone through community input. It should be paving the way for the LEDA plan. So hopefully by the time you walk away tonight, LEDA is not just some kind of abstract economic development thing, that you might have a better idea of what it is and how it can benefit the village in particular. Next slide. So what do we already have that LEDA could directly benefit? To try to give you some concrete examples, the 4th Street corridor, this is the commercial spine of the village where we want to continue to encourage and kind of sequester the commercial activity. These are where our restaurants, our shops, our small services give the village some of its energy. It's quirky, it's eclectic, it's very much village scale, and LEDA can help continue that and promote that. We have anchors in the village like the Anderson House property, which helps tie the village to its history and its open space. We have the Del Norte open space, only recently acquired, which is still in active farming and doubles as a community asset. There are improvements that can be made to that through LEDA funding. And of course, the Agri-Nature Center, which has become a hub for workshops, community groups, and events for the village on almost a weekly basis. On top of that, the village has working farms, orchards, and growers markets that not only feed people, but help preserve the rural landscape that the village is really proud of. And then there's the nonprofit and cultural groups. These are folks that help tell the story of the village, bring people together, and make sure that that history doesn't get lost. This is the foundation of the village of Los Ranchos, and these are the things that already make Los Ranchos special. LEDA would not seek to eliminate any of that or to try to bring in kind of new business or ideas. It's really a tool that can lift up those existing assets to make it stronger and make sure that they're supported into the future. Next slide. So what can we do with LEDA funding for all of those great things that I just listed? This plan gives the village a way to support small but meaningful improvements along 4th Street, for example. Things like better signage, better lighting, parking lot improvements, sidewalk improvements to make for a better pedestrian experience. Think about sidewalk cafes and patios that maybe a small restaurateur just cannot afford to put in themselves. These are things that LEDA can help fund. It allows us to enhance the community anchors that I talked about. So places like the Anderson House and the Agri-Nature Center are already a space that draws people in to the village. With LEDA funding, we could add amenities to those existing spaces. Think about trailheads, signs, interpretive signage, classrooms. I also have restrooms listed here, but I know restrooms can be a little controversial, so we won't talk about public restrooms quite yet. Those are the things that make these sites more functional and more inviting. And then, as I mentioned, the nonprofit organizations, LEDA funding can support those. Groups like the Historical Society, the Arts Market, and even our newly formed Main Street organization. These are folks that are doing the kind of on-the-ground work to bring people together, to bring history together, to make sure that the village doesn't lose any of that. We can help them with updated programming, perhaps getting event space, or new opportunities that help them help us celebrate who we are. And finally, everything that we would do with LEDA funding would need to tie back to the village identity. I think the village identity is pretty clear in all the existing documentation, the organizations, and the assets we have. This funding is not about becoming something the village is not. The reason that a LEDA plan is required is because every jurisdiction that uses LEDA funding is so different. We would not want to copy-paste Albuquerque's plan or Las Cruces' plan. They have very different needs and a very different economy, and so this is the way that we can tailor LEDA funding to be discrete to what the village needs and what the village wants. Next slide. So how would it work? It would start out with an application process. So any private entity, so think a small restaurant or maybe someone who owns an active farm or an existing service along 4th Street, they would need to come to the village and submit an application saying, here's the funding that I want, here's what I'm going to use it for, here's the public benefit that is gained from that. Everything has to be outlined very explicitly. This is not just a way for government to give folks money and say, we hope you do something great with it, we'll find out later. So after the application is received, staff will review that for alignment with the LEDA plan, the LEDA ordinances. There will be governing documents on what is eligible and what is not. So staff will take kind of a first stab on, does it comply? Next, the mayor has proposed to include in the plan a community review committee. So once staff does kind of a technical analysis, it would go to a 5-member committee made up of community owners, business owners in the village who would also provide their input on what the applicant is asking for, what they're purporting the village will gain from it, and providing comment on that. Then the request will go to the governing body. This is a requirement of state statute that every LEDA project be approved by ordinance. So the Board of Trustees would have to consider every application that comes through the village. One thing that's great about that is a public process. Those meetings are open to public comment. And so folks who are interested in a particular project would be able to see all the application materials, and they would be able to come talk to the Board of Trustees about why they think this is appropriate, why it's not, why certain pieces should be renegotiated, etc. So none of this happens behind a closed door, which is really important when you're talking about putting government funding into private enterprise. And then after the governing body, the Board of Trustees, approves the ordinance, the village would enter into what's called a PPA. This is the Project Participation Agreement. This is where all the details live. These are things like, how much funding are we giving you? How many jobs are you promising to create? What do you anticipate your GRT revenue to be? And most importantly, what happens if all of the benchmarks that we've set aren't met? This is really important in LEDA plans and LEDA ordinances, that the village offer itself some protection to say, if we give you funding and then you didn't do what you said you were going to, that there's recourse for that. I think that's really important from a public standpoint, that we want you to know that there will be safeguards with how we are intending to use your taxpayer money. That's the accountability piece, which seems most important, which is what the plan and the ordinance seeks to offer. Next slide. So as we wrap up, that's the kind of 30,000-foot view of the plan that we are currently drafting. I want to leave you with a bit of the big picture before we go into discussion. Again, I want to reiterate that LEDA, as we are thinking about it, is not intending to change the village. It's not about chasing big outside projects to bring here. There's already so much good stuff going on here that we don't really need to do that, luckily. I think maybe other jurisdictions do, but there's a lot here for us to build up internally. This plan seeks to strengthen what already makes us unique and special, but to make it a little cleaner or a little more attractive, and to make sure that the folks who live here and use these amenities can continue to do that, and to make it accessible for people who don't. Most importantly, this plan intends to respect and honor the semi-rural character of Los Ranchos. In the draft of the plan, you'll see that there is nothing in there that seeks to bring in big new urban development. It's really about maintaining the scale of what exists today, and giving people an opportunity to build upon that. At the end of the day, as the presentation started, it's about investing in ourselves by taking care of the things that Los Ranchos already has, the farms, the 4th Street corridor, the culture. We're building a future that is truly Los Ranchos, and we'll have the money to do it, which we don't have now. So that's all I have for my kind of 30,000-foot view of the plan. I believe the mayor is going to kind of go into some open discussion. Darnell wanted me to remind folks, if you're going to ask a question or speak, you have to do it into a microphone, or else it won't get picked up on the video. So I'll run a microphone around to folks as we take comments. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Anna. That's great. So a couple of things. One, I also want to make sure, since we're going to be adding some stuff to this, I want to make sure that, at least from my 2 cents, I want to make sure that we also recognize that economic development can also mean expanding of existing businesses. And I think that's an important piece that sometimes we don't always focus on. If someone has a business and they want to add additional staff, if you will, or expand the business, this is an opportunity how the village can maybe support that effort. So as much as we're trying, that's the growing our businesses and or our community. The other piece is that, look, if we do have, for example, a grocery store wanting to locate into the village, and there is some assistance that's needed for infrastructure, such as perhaps water and sewer lines, those sort of things that may cost us some additional dollars, that there's an opportunity for us to have that discussion and to encourage that kind of development in our community so that we have additional benefits for the residents that live here. We're not looking at bringing an Intel to the village. I mean, it'd be cool to get another Intel in the region, but it's not going to come to the village. So I want to make sure that we sort of keep this in some perspective as it relates to, it may be a little too village-centric maybe for some folks, and I'd love to hear your opinions on that. But I really, and the staff really erred on the side of, look, this is about investing in ourselves. This is a framework. There's more work to be done before this is ready for I would say, for prime time and final approval. But this is the start of this conversation. So Magda, who is our executive director for our Main Street program or / our economic development group here in the village that we just started, is going to obviously take the questions and some of the information down so that we have it written or in some way so that we can come back and look through it and make sure we incorporate some of the ideas. So as Shanna said, we'll start the conversation. If you would raise your hands and give us your perspective, then we can proceed going forward. So with that, is that mic on, Shanna?
It is. I'll pass it around if you want to call on folks. I'll deliver the mic.
Sure, let's just start with Trustee Kiefer.
Thank you. And all I wanted to say before everyone gets started with their public opinion is I had the opportunity this afternoon to participate in the first Main Street officer board meeting before the large board meeting coming up. And all of the officers of Main Street support LEDA. I know that was one of the questions at our Board of Trustee meeting is how are the businesses feel about this? And those officers all said, you can speak on behalf of us and we support it completely. So I just wanted to make that announcement before public discussion.
Thank you very much. Okay, great. Why don't we pass the mic over to Shanna and we'll start with Tom.
Thank you. I guess part of what I was confused last time at the board meeting, there's really two major focuses with LEDA. There's the LEDA funding that the state does, and that has certain kinds of funding limitations on it. And then there's the gross receipts, the local gross receipts tax LEDA that has other sets of regulations on it and qualifications. It would be really helpful to know how those differ and because it seems like the local allows a lot more of the kinds of things that Los Ranchos has been looking for and what I'm looking for in terms of Los Ranchos and economic development, where the state LEDA funding is much more looking at traditional economic development. They're looking at getting more people hired in and things like that. And they're not at all focused on any increasing gross receipts tax in the jurisdiction. They're more looking at sales that are outside the jurisdiction than inside the jurisdiction.
Wow, Tom, that's perfect. I should have had you come up and say that at the council, at the trustee meeting. That's exactly right. The local LEDA gives us the flexibility to fill or to have this plan come to fruition with actual money behind it to do some things that we want to do locally. It also gives us the ability to use some of those funds to match state dollars if there are state dollars available for projects. Like, for example, if we want to add more amenities to 4th Street and we apply to the DOT, for example, they typically request a 20% match or so. Having this money in our coffers would be the opportunity for us to say, look, for 20%, we might have $1 million and it'll cost us, X amount of money to match. So that is the option. And you're right, Tom. The state economic development, and Grant has been involved with this for many years, is the state funds are typically about enticing new businesses to come into the communities that might expand. Let's say, for example, just for discussion's sake, that a company like Vara might want to expand its processing facility in Los Ranchos. And they go to the state economic development folks and say, look, we're going to hire an additional 50 employees, but we need X amount of money in order to make the investment in infrastructure, such as potentially an IRB to build the building, or additional support for water and sewer, whatever the case might be. That's where the state might come back in and say, look, we're interested in supporting that. This legislation gives us the vehicle to be the pass-through, so that it can go through the village, so that we get an opportunity to also weigh in on some of the clawbacks that are part of the requirements of these grants, et cetera, but also to ensure that they're complying with our zoning requirements, that they're complying with all our special needs here at the local level. So you're absolutely right, Tom. That was a good explanation. Thank you.
One other question. One of the assets of this village that I noticed was missing in this economic development was lots 4, 5, and 6 of the village center development. That those aren't mentioned as us having any input, which, given that we hired the developer to build it, and of course they built something that the village didn't want, prior administration did seem to find it fancy, but that should be something that I would be expecting that would be very high on an economic development plan as to what do we want to do with those remaining lots, since we lost the project as is now half a residential development when it was supposed to be a commercial development. And that's what it was sold to us as. And the other piece that goes along with it, the history is, we had an administration who said that fit with the master plan, that was something that was what the village wanted, and it wasn't what we wanted. So there's a lot of us that are probably very suspicious of that process, and wanting to be able to be sure that we don't have something that runs amok, and even though the citizens stood up and said this isn't what we wanted, that we got it rammed down our throats, and we don't want to have that happen again.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. So anybody else on this side of the room? Any thoughts? Going once, going twice? There might be more conversation. So let's come to this other side. Let's go with Jeff.
Thank you, Shannon. A question and a clarification. You mentioned that the plan, each individual application or project would need to be approved by ordinance, not by resolution. That's the clarification, okay. And then the other, kind of piggybacking on what Tom was saying, with respect to the 2 items that are up for consideration, one by the voters at the ballot is the LOGAR, the local gross receipts tax, and then of course the ordinance that you're hearing for the second time on the 23rd. One doesn't depend on the other. I mean, it's 2 separate propositions, and I think that's one thing that people have asked me about, and I've tried to keep clear, and I thought it was worth mentioning.
No, I appreciate that, Jeff. And they are 2 separate, however, one feeds the other, so to speak, right? We could absolutely just, let's just say, for example, we have the ordinance on the ballot, or at least the proposition on the ballot. Let's just assume that the voters decide that that's not where they want to spend their dollars at this point. That doesn't mean this process goes away. We still need an economic development plan, and we still need a LEDA, if you will, structure, so that in case there is some state dollars that come through us for some business expansion, such as the example I gave or what have you, so that we can become part of that process for development. However, if the tax does pass. Now we have a plan in place, we have a process, and now we have a way and a mechanism to fund some of those issues that we find that are important for our community. And let me just make sure that I also don't want to leave you all with this impression. Look, the quarter cent will yield probably about $500,000 a year in revenue to the village. Given the structure that we have today in Santa Fe, and the state just changed their regulations, if the voters approve that in November, the village is not going to be receiving any funding until after July 1 of next year. The state changed their implementation of tax structure, I think it was either last year or the year before. They used to be able to say that if you had a tax that was passed at an election, there were 2 times of the year that the tax could be imposed. One was either in January, the beginning of the calendar year, or in July, the beginning of the fiscal year. They've since changed, mostly because I think Tax and Rev has a hard time keeping up with all of these municipalities and county governments and other special units of government that are always have the opportunity to do these sort of things. So now the only time that that can get changed is July 1 of 2026. So putting that in sort of calculus, we're not looking at having revenues to fund this plan, or if it was approved, until probably January 1 of 2027, when we would have at least some dollars in our coffers to begin to have the conversation, if you will, in earnest. The last piece that we didn't have in the plan, that it just occurred to me as we're speaking, and I just want to be clear, that the trustees also, because of their role as the governing body, can also decide that they want to bond for some of these funds, because now you have a revenue stream. So if, let's just say, we decide that we want to do something in a more significant way, and whatever that might be, let's just say we want to build a multi-purpose convention center type facility at the Agri-Nature Center to attract more agritourism, and that's a $2 or $3 million project, the village could actually bond for a portion of that revenue stream to generate that revenue to build that facility sooner rather than later. But those are all decisions to be made once we get to, as they say, we'll cross the river when we get to that bridge. I always say it that way because a lot of folks don't think about running into a river in this parts. But long and the short, that's another way of doing that. So, but I just wanted to make sure we were clear about that. So if you might put that in that, and Shanna, we might think about just putting some excerpt in there that the village trustees do have the prerogative as the representatives to entertain that. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Well, Shanna will give you her. She's got the mic there.
Can multifamily housing be a LEDA project in the village?
Well, in the clear structure of economic development, it could. But if it's not in this package, then it would be a reaching, if you will, a reach to have to convince the trustees that they should defer or differ from the LEDA plan, or in this case, our investment in ourselves plan to bring in a project like that, and it has to go through their process in a public way. I would say that, unfortunately, that's the beauty of democracy. Sometimes those kinds of things can come up, but I would argue that if it's not in the plan, it can't be funded with at least the local dollars.
Okay, but how about the state dollars?
Now, the state, we don't control the state legislature and the governor as it relates to what they want to do. But again, this is why it's important to have this plan, because that money has to come to the village trustees to have that conversation. So in that way, we do have a way to at least express whether we support or not support the effort, and at least begin to have that conversation. The legislature, and especially the state, is not going to come in and give a community a project that the community really is not interested in having. So I would say that, of course, the legislature has the ultimate authority over all of us as communities and the governor, but typically that doesn't usually works organically from the community first. Yes, ma'am. We have another question here, Sean.
Thank you. I just, point of clarification, I didn't get to know the history. Are you moving forward with the Village of Los Ranchos being the fiscal agent no matter what? Is that part of the LIDA process? Do you see what I'm trying to, like, the quarter-cent tax, is that separate from the fiscal agent? It's all packaged together,
Right.
correct?
Right. So if the voters approve the quarter cent, the village becomes the recipient of those funds, and it relies, so in real essence, yes, the village is the fiscal agent on behalf of the community for those funds.
And then what's the long term for the LIDA funds? Is that a 25-cent tax? Long term, is there a term on that? Is that something that has to be renewed? How does that look?
At this point, it's a quarter cent. So for every $100, $100 is 25 cents. It does not have a sunset clause on it. It would be part of the village's budgeting process on a by year basis based on the plan.
And then my last question is, what do you think the process looks like then for application? Because you're talking about 2027 for, like, say your coffers they have some money in it, and you're looking at an administration process for the community to go through that application. What would you say if you just say on the outset, because I know you have a little experience with process, what is that, do you think that looks like when a business or somebody comes and says, hey, I'd like this process, to start this process? Are we talking 6 months, 7 months?
I would say that I don't want to,
Size of project.
size of the project, right. I don't want to forego or take any jump to any conclusions. I would hope that the voters support the plan. So if the voters approve the tax in November, I would say that I would be interested in hearing what people want to do with that money starting January, and even having the conversations. However, in order to actually put money on the table and say, look, here's what we can give you, obviously we have to wait probably another 8 to 10 months as we start getting money in the door. But I will say to all of you, all the businesses, and to anyone who's, look, I'm actually interested in your ideas now. I just want to know what they are. Let's start generating some of those conversations, just because, look, it doesn't mean that this is the only way we can fund our projects. You know, if we have something that's really good and that we think we want to go to the legislature to ask for some state funds, I mean, I think the trustees and I would say, look, if this is a good idea, let's see if we can't find some money in some grants or some other programs that would help fund these. These elected positions that we all serve in, time goes by like this. And so as soon as we could get started in some of these things, I'd love to be able to show the community some change and really get us all thinking about how to unite us. You know, Tom's points are well taken. However, that project is that project. We need to start focusing on how we can all do this together collectively and do some really good things for the community. George, thank you for the question.
And this is a question for Shauna. Shauna, can we put guardrails on the LIDA plan that we come up with that respond to what Betty said and what Tom said?
I think, yes, we can be as explicit or not about any type of criteria that the village feels is appropriate or not. In reviewing other LIDA plans from around the state, what I saw is that communities, there's kind of a fine line between getting so specific that you box yourself out of a project that you might actually want, while also trying to prevent things that you really don't want. That's a line that we need to walk, and we should figure out how to walk that.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Hi, I own a preschool on 4th Street, and I just want to say I'm in full support of this. I love it. I have been there 18 years, and I've seen a lot of small businesses come and go, and it always makes me so sad to see these businesses close, and I've always felt like it's so hard to make it here. It's different from me being a school, but it's even hard for us to make it, and we want to be a part of this community. And then I see these new, strip malls come up, and growth is great, but then they're empty, and what's going to go in there? So I like the idea of helping businesses come, but I really like the idea that you're going to help what's already here. Yeah. Because that's what I've been thinking for years, is why can't we help who's already here? Because it's so sad. I don't know why these businesses close. All I know is it's tough. And I do have a question. So say my school wants to build a new parking lot, or, or renovate, redo something, because we're a really old building. Is there an advisor with LEDA that would help me? Because I wouldn't even know what to ask for on an application.
Absolutely. I think that the point would be is that we would look at through either our Main Street program and or through the staff is bringing, once we get the plan in place, bringing in these applications and reviewing them and giving some technical assistance to businesses. I don't want to leave everyone with the impression that we're going to build new buildings for everybody. That's not what that would be about. But let's just say, for example, your school is having an issue with parking because it's constrained because of the size of the building and the lot. What if we were able to find a vacant lot that the village owned and that the village would then make available for folks to park, to either pick up the kids or drop off the kids, or maybe even for some of your staff members? That's the kind of investment that really helps you as a business owner to focus on what you want to do and help to have the village support that effort. The same would be, let's say Hops Brew House wants to expand their facility and or needs additional parking. Again, looking at vacant land, other things to help them expand their business. And lo and behold, look, I would be remiss if we didn't say this as a really jewel for us. Penny Remby and their project is an example, a classic example of how that project has grown and become such a cornerstone for the village off of Rio Grande. All that done with the family's investments that really has made it a great, if you will, destination. So we've got to look for more of those kinds of opportunities along 4th Street and other parts of our village. And then the last piece I would say, look, we have a lot of businesses that aren't necessarily on 4th Street. A lot of residential folks that are basically consultants and or working from home that add value to the village by doing the work that they do and paying gross receipts tax that help us provide the services we're providing. So looking at how we might present more connectivity with internet services or other things of that nature so that infrastructure is available so that they can continue to do their work from their home or what have you. So there's some opportunities there, I think, that really are before us. We can't be all things to all people, but we can certainly try and be as much as we can, is my point in trying to see if I'd rather put my foot forward and do something than just sit back and say, well, can't do that, don't have any money, et cetera. So, and one last piece that's really important that I think Grant made a point, and this is more from an educational standpoint for all of us. All of our tax dollars that we collect today are all subject to the anti-donation clause. That's really an important piece to understand. We can't today, with any of our dollars, without meeting a whole threshold, go out and say we're going to build a portal for a business using our general fund money that we have in our coffers, because all of those funds are subject to the anti-donation clause of the state constitution, which means that you cannot give public dollars for a private entity. This is important. This quarter cent is not subject to that provision. So it gives us a lot more flexibility as a community to be able to do the investments. That's why, to me, the grants for improvements to facades and to adding, if you will, like I said earlier, the idea, it seems to me, is that during COVID, when we had all kinds of federal dollars, the city of Albuquerque spent a ton of money supporting people adding portals to their businesses so that people could sit outside to eat. And we had never done that before, and I have no clue why, especially with the weather we have in our state and how cool it is to eat out. Now all of a sudden, those state dollars came in, and we obviously had to sit. We had to space ourselves. We couldn't be in a meeting like this, so we were all sitting outside. But it was an opportunity for all of us to experiment with a new idea of how to provide a service, and so I think we ought to be doing that now with the village, with some of our businesses, so that we can have more, or that our arts market can can prosper, or a farmer's market, and the Historical Society and all the work that they're doing to make sure that they get an opportunity, some grants to continue their work so that we can make sure that the history of the village isn't lost. Those sort of things I think are really important. Mr.
I was going to mention one more thing, Mayor. I was going to tell you that when we did 4th Street, that parking lot that was built with 4th Street was actually owned by an individual here in the village who was willing to sell it to use as a parking lot. LEDA funds could have been used for that parking lot, but instead it came out of village coffers to buy that lot and improve that into a parking lot. So it's an example of something that we could have done differently from our past.
Mm-hmm. That's a great example, for sure.
Sorry.
How's everybody doing? My name is John Edward. I'm running for the trustees. I've been a village resident all my life. And one of the things I've done is have had an orchard. I've lived in different parts of the city and different parts of the country. And the one thing I've observed is that, communities are no different than a tree. We're a living organism. And to the degree that we're not growing, we're dying. And you see this all around the city of Albuquerque. Many trees are dying back because we deplete them of any resource they need to grow. And once they begin to die back and you see all the dead foliage at the end of the tree, you'll have to do 2 to 3 times the resources to bring it back to life, if you can. Now, I lived in the Southeast Heights, and when you get a cancer in the form of boarded up buildings, it spreads way faster and lasts much longer than you can otherwise anticipate. And what I see about this tax is a way for, if I can use the tree metaphor, is that this tree is self-fertile. We are growing ourselves and we are feeding ourselves. Oftentimes we all have savings accounts that we're saving for something and we deplete it because we want to go on a vacation or we find something that's an emergency that's not an emergency. This is a way that we can reinvest in ourselves. And interestingly enough, if you take a look at the gross receipts, many of the businesses will track it. It's coming from people from outside of our community. It's not our own pocketbook. And to that effect, I think it's an idea that we can continue to reinvest in ourselves, which if a community is not reinvesting in itself, we're going to have dieback. And I think we can actually have higher quality development. And that's what I'm about, is having a higher level of degree of quality of development. And it doesn't mean you have to pave everything over. I think that when you have high quality development, in fact, you can do exactly the opposite. And I like the idea of reinvestment because generally we tend not to do that.
Yeah, hi, this is Gil Benavides. So to me, it was very important to hear that the businesses, the small businesses on 4th Street are behind this LEDA proposal on the ballot. That'll be on the ballot. So I think that's very important because they're the ones that need the customers to come in. And if they're not afraid of having a 0.25% tax and they realize it's going to go to help them, I think that's very powerful. So my question is about how much discretion the Board of Trustees has when it comes time to approve or deny an application. If I understand the process, a business would come in, do an application, there'll be a committee, and maybe that committee makes a recommendation to the Board of Trustees. I don't know if it goes through P&Z or not, but okay. And so, you know, sometimes as a board member up there, you see something come before you that fits the ordinances to a T, right? There's no problem at all, but it's like, we didn't think of this special thing that this person wants to do, and we wish we could deny it, but now we got a problem, right? Because the ordinance says they can do something, and you want to say they can't, right? So you just bite your lip and you do it, right? So how much discretion do we have if if something comes to us and there's, the public says, you know, we don't like this, and let's say it came to us from the committee with a recommendation to approve, and there was public outrage against it, and now we're faced with saying, should we deny or approve? Do we have that same problem? Can you comment about that, Shauna?
I'll let Shauna take the first take at it.
Yeah, Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the Board of Trustees has purview to do whatever they want. So even if a recommendation from the staff or the committee is approval, you as a governing body, that is just a recommendation. You can move in the direction you want. I will say, and because I know this on the planning side of things, if there's something before you that meets all the requirements of the law, it is hard to say no. And if you say no to some of those things, the applicant might have recourse. And so I'm not sure if your experience in other LEDA communities, Mayor, has there been some kind of leeway or some kind of catch-all that's like, well, if the board doesn't like it, even though you check all the boxes, they can say no?
Sure, I think, first and foremost, I think, as we all know, democracy is not always pretty. And there's a couple of things I would say, Trustee Benavides, on that issue. One, as Shanna says, obviously, the governing board, the board of directors, in case the trustees, and to some extent where I play in that role, ultimately has authority in how taxpayer money is allocated, just like you do with the budget and other things. Number one. Number two, if there are we will research what maybe other communities may have put. I think going to Trustee Ratnovich's point about bumpers, if or guardrails, to make sure. But you know, all of these decisions are challenging. They're the ones that we have to use our best judgment and to ensure that we do the best on behalf of the community. And look, I think that's why it's important to have a community committee that does the preliminary reviews, because hopefully they can pick up that conversation so that whenever the trustees have to make a decision, we've at least had some vetting of the process and the projects. I don't know that I can give you an ironclad decision that says, look, if they come in with red colored paper, they're done. You know, I mean, there's just going to be your judgment call at the moment. But chances are that most of these projects are going to be are going to follow a lot of what the rules are. And, you know, we're going to have some tough decisions, because here's the other piece of it. We can also get more projects than we have money to deal with, right? And we will. And then we'll have to make some prioritization of what projects we fund. And those are the kinds of, and so the question is a good one in the sense that maybe we need to think about putting a little more structure to that approval process so that we can give you all as much as we can in terms of tools to be able to make those decisions. But I'm not quite sure I'm answering your question specifically, but yeah.
No, but I'm glad you're thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah. So I know that Jeff has a group of folks that are going to be taking a walk. So thank you all for being here. Thanks, Jeff. And anyway, we're getting close to some time here that, and John has one more comment, and we'll go from there, and so does Tom, and I suspect so does the trustee. Let's do this. I think it's really important to say thanks to all of you for showing up and for being here. I also appreciate at least what I've perceived to be a lot of support from the community to do something for ourselves. And I think that to me is very gratifying, and I appreciate all of your coming out here tonight. We'll have a meeting on the 23rd. Again, just to make sure, we're not approving the plan the 23rd. All we're doing is approving the ordinance that now continues the work to get this plan refined based on the conversations tonight, and probably even another meeting, I suspect, before we finally bring it to the trustees for final approval. So with that, why don't you get with John over there, and we'll go around the horn again one more time.
So one of the things I was curious about, I like to hunt, and one of the things I hunt for, people put in for tags and they don't get selected. To what degree can somebody get selected and they can't re-enter the mill if there is an abundance of applications before they ask for their next one, so that, so to speak, spread the wealth? And it would appear to be maybe political if somebody is continually always getting money.
Sure.
That's kind of where I'm going. How do we deal with that?
That's a guardrail that we could put into the plan to say if an entity is awarded money in 1 year, they're ineligible from applying for another 24 months or something. Those are things that we get to decide.
Yeah. And keep in mind, those are some of the structural pieces that we can put in, you know, once, that's all of that. I mean, if it makes folks feel comfortable, we can certainly include that in the plan. But a lot of those things, John, you're absolutely right. We want to make sure that we give everyone a fair opportunity to get an opportunity to invest in themselves. Trustee, can we just defer so that our other citizens, and then we'll go back to you if you don't mind.
Okay, this is a question about a greater good being the priority. If somebody's a niche interest, you know, I want my single business that sells Scotch tape to have a portico so that people, and parking, or maybe something like a dog park. I don't know what it would be. Can you give examples of greater good projects around the state that have just passed with no problems?
Well, sure. I think the mere fact that passing an ordinance, you know, is a greater good, obviously, having good structure. But I'll give you some good examples. The city has, of Albuquerque, which is one of my more upfront experiences, you know, has money in different components and different pots. There are some funds that we have for development, if you will, for the community. And sometimes we look at projects, for example, parks and facilities that support the entire community usually have a higher priority in our capital program than necessarily funding a storm drainage system at the end of a cul-de-sac where there may be neighbors moving in the next 10 years versus something that we need today. I would give you a really good example, I think we've all talked about it, is the point that, I think, was it Susan, right? That Susan raised, which was, I don't have enough parking. Let's find a vacant lot that we can, you know, work on. And guess what? Susan's got some places for her staff to park, but so-and-so is going to be able to use that at night for their business so their customers can find a place to park as well. Those are the kinds of ideas, I think, that if they came to the board and our process works and we set up the right structure, you know, we can give this committee prioritization, say, look, we'll prioritize projects that serve the community as a whole, and then we'll, you know, have a different category for grants. And keep in mind, and this is a thought as we go through this, Shanna, look, if we get $500,000 a year from this fund, the trustees can set up a process that says, all right, 250 of that we're going to dedicate to special uses as it relates to community needs, such as parking lots, et cetera, et cetera. The other 250 we might want to dedicate to a bigger project so that we can get that project out the door because it has value for the entire community. Those are the kinds of decisions that the trustees can make. I always think about it from this perspective. We had in our budget at the city, we had some funds that were available just for community projects. You know, grants in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $30,000 to do porches, et cetera, and some other things. And the limit was 200,000. And so what we would say is that we have 200,000. We're interested in applications for the next 30 days. Give us those applications. The committee is going to review those, prioritize those, and bring them to the trustees. Folks that don't get funding because there was not money left or not enough money to fund those projects will be put into a priority list for the following year, and/or we might try and figure out how we get other funding matches from other sources. Or they could come back and tell John and I, we want to take $20,000 from the budget to help this one project because it really is a good project. I mean, so there are some ways for us to work through that. So those are the kinds of structures that could easily be created through this process. All right. Can we get him on the mic so that way? We've got a.
I just have a few. My company works around the state. The city of Raton fixed up their theater, which was an old 30s vintage theater that now shows movies again. The city of Clovis used it to use this funding mechanism to turn an old hotel into apartments for the city. So there's lots of examples around the state. I just wanted to answer
Thanks.
part of the question.
Right. Gwen?
Hi, Gwen Baldwin, also in the crew of running for trustee. And I would encourage us to also look at sort of joint applications. So some of that may be through Main Street, if there's a sense of a unified branding effort that folks need help with. But it may be that in a cluster of businesses in one section of Fourth, for example, or in one other area of the village has a specific desire and need, and it would be great if all the individual businesses didn't have to file separate applications, but they could come in some kind of joint application.
Okay.
The other thing is, I think it's going to be important to factor in the facilities that are eligible that are village-owned, and then the private sector growth of small business, sort of how we prioritize, or you talked a little bit about maybe having sort of the big project fund, and then the sort of community good or individual community funds. And I think that's going to be really important to identify how the Board of Trustees and how the staff is going to prioritize or evaluate investments in village-owned facilities.
Those are great points. One of the things that other governments do that would be a good practice for us is at the beginning of every year, budget-wise, that we set parameters for this economic development fund, where the trustees decide 20% of the funds are available for X, the other percentage are available for Y, and these are the bigger projects that we want to fund. So then the staff now knows that X amount of money is available for grants, and that's public, so everyone knows how much money is available. And then secondly, if it's for other projects that we want to fund, then we know how much money that's available. Other cities do that as a prioritization in the budget, so that then that way there's no surprise to folks when we find out that, okay, there's $150,000 available for small business grants and loans, and there's X amount of money available for bigger projects. That's the kind of prioritization that can be done through the budget every year, so that way the staff has direction in terms of what they have to work with. Any other questions? Oh yeah, I'm sorry, here, Trustee Kiefer.
Thank you. Just one more point. I really like that, and we should probably include that in the ordinance of once a year that the Board of Trustees, and I think that would help kind of some of the concerns I've heard around here of how do we keep our elected officials honest? Because, I mean, honestly, that's kind of, I think, what people still have in the back of their minds of public meetings and making sure that stays, that government actions are transparent. But to Gil, to your point, I think for Shanna in history, you may want to look at Ordinance 284. It was repealed. It was the Conservation Pilot Project part that was repealed, but it specifically had language in it that gave the Board of Trustees complete discretion. Even if the project checked all the boxes, the board could have still said no to the project. And maybe with that type of language, that language could be put into the ordinance of the LIDA funds and how they're used to give the board that carte blanche discretion of approvals and not.
Okay, that's great. One of the things that also, just for discussion's sake, remember the village cannot, as much as I'd like to, I laugh in saying that, as much as the mayor or John and the administrator in the village staff cannot spend money unless it's approved in the budget. So that's why this is an important piece. As we collect these funds, they've got to be appropriated by the trustees before we're able to use them for purposes. So that's why this structure is just no different than anything else. We've got to have this money in the budget and plan to expend it, and that's when where the if you will, putting the money in different compartments, as I say, is going to be done during the budgeting process. Tom, you have one more question, my friend.
Yep. I just want to say that I don't want to. I really think this is a great idea. I was speaking more about things to take into consideration, but I think that had we had such a committee, that things that happened at 4th and Osuna probably wouldn't have happened, or they would have happened differently, that it didn't allow, there wasn't a place for the citizens to have input, and this would be a great way for citizens to have input and to keep going forward with it. And I think that's a real positive. I mean, it gives another place for there's the conversation to be happening that is then able to be disseminated, and that things don't get just done at the last minute, but actually get to have a conversation about it, and people get to know about it, and it doesn't happen in the dark rooms.
Okay, well, very good. I think that those are all helpful comments as it relates to the process. And look, I think for all of us, we all learn from our mistakes or from our successes. So we, I think, are in a place where we can do some really good. I will tell you what, we're going to end the meeting now and just say to all of you, thanks again. If you want to visit with Shanna and give her some thoughts, or if you have some other thoughts, look, it's going to be on the website. We're going to put it out hopefully tomorrow after we incorporate some of these ideas. And please feel free to encourage your neighbors, et cetera, to look at it. And more importantly, please, I think it's a great opportunity for us to invest in our community, and to the extent you can spread the word, that would be really super helpful. Thank you all for being here this evening.